again, Sandwich. I'm Greg Anderson. Saddle up, friends. It's time to get out and make your voice heard. Election Day is coming up May 4, and there are a number of races and candidates who want your vote. We have the school committee, we have the select board, we have the planning board, we have others. But today, let's talk about a contested race for one 3-year term on the Board of Health. Incumbent David Liskowsky is vying to hold his seat against challenger Stephen Barr. And from my seat, having talked to these two gentlemen, I'll talk to one. These are two very different people. Let's talk to David Liskowsky. David, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you. So so my understanding is when you first joined the board, you were appointed because there was a vacancy.
Exactly.
And then you ran again.
Yes.
And you won. So this is your second election. How's the candidacy going?
It's going fine. Now, the first time I was elected, I ran unopposed. So this is a different animal that I'm dealing with now. It's a contested race. I have an opponent, and so it's a little bit more competitive.
I hear you. So you have been on the board, for the last year and a half?
About a year and a half. I was appointed by the select board, I think it was December of 2021, to fill out the term of a person who was on the board who had moved away.
Yep.
And then in order to stay on the board, I had to get reelected in May.
What is, with you having a sitting member of the board, give us a nutshell. What's the Board of Health do?
There's a wide variety of responsibilities the board has and covers a broad range of topics, everything from septic systems to food safety in restaurants and things like that, responsibility for the overall health of the community. There's just a broad array of topics that we are involved in. Some of them are sort of not routine, but they're the established responsibilities of the boards of health. But then there are issues that come up that are unique, and there's a bunch of them going on right now in the town. Perhaps we can discuss some of those in a little bit.
Give me an example.
Well, I think one of the big issues right now is, and there's some activity that I saw in this week's Enterprise, the town is getting money from the National Opioid Settlement. The money, I guess, as I understand, the town has received some funds, but there'll be continuing funds coming for, I think the plan is for another 16 years. I think the town is about to get about $1 million over that 16 years. And so the question is, how will that money be spent? Now, according to the way the state is doling out the money has to be spent on things like either prevention, recovery, harm reduction, things like that. So I think the town is getting organized as to how the money will be handled and how the money will be allotted and how it will be spent.
Does the Board of Health have a say in that?
We feel, yes, we would like to.
Okay.
We've had a lot of discussion about that on the board of us getting plugged into what the town is doing.
Yeah.
My understanding is that I think it's Heather Harper, the assistant town manager, is kind of leading the effort. I think I have that right. And so we would like to also get plugged into that and at least have some say in perhaps and hopefully provide what expertise we can in terms of how the monies might be spent.
Okay. Tell me what do you love about being on the board and what gives you the most challenge? I've been on boards. They're not always easy. And there's only 3 of you.
I'm very new to being a part of a town government, so this is a new activity for me. I retired in 2016. When I came to Sandwich, I wanted to do something to contribute back to the town. With my background and training, the Board of Health seemed to be the only thing that I was probably qualified to do. So I approached that. I think one of the hardest things for me so far is, like I said, there really is a broad range of responsibilities that the board has, and trying to educate myself to at least understand what they are. I know, you can't be an expert in everything, but just trying to understand what the topics are. I mean, I feel kind of that when you're on a board, or any, where you're making decisions on behalf of the town, that you have to be very thoughtful about what you're doing. You have to look at whatever issues arise and, really take all the information that's available, analyze it, and then make a decision. And so to do that analysis, you have to have some knowledge about what you're looking at.
Right.
And so, I have some background in the health and medical arena, but then there's other areas, I got to say, I didn't know much about septic systems, and, I need to learn about that.
Well, no one can be fully educated on everything.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the reasons people come to boards because it gives diversity of that. Let me talk to you a little bit about your challengers' assertions. He clearly wants your seat. Mm-hmm. And fair enough, that's democracy.
Absolutely.
And that's good. But he said, in information to us, he said, the people of Sandwich do not need an elected official eroding their God-given rights. And of proposed regulations, these chicken regulations that he's referenced, he said, Mr. Liskowsky's regulations were intended to take away people's God-given rights to do what they want to do on their own property. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's a very a large overstatement. I think he's exaggerating about what the intent of the regulations is. Another thing is they weren't my regulations. They were the Board of Health regulations. We did have a town meeting, which was an open meeting, and there was a large group of folks who keep chickens, and they were not happy with our proposed idea. And the upshot of it was, I think we got a lot of feedback from those folks, and we've tabled it, and we're not going forward with it.
So to clarify that, it's tabled means it could come back any time. Is it dead?
I think it's dead.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for the other board members,
Sure.
but certainly I know just going through the work we have to do on other topics, we haven't even talked about it since the July meeting, and we tabled it. It's just certainly, yes, as far as I'm concerned, it's dead. In terms of his, God-given rights, I think it's an overstatement. The intent of the chicken regulations, the reason we went forward with it, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but there were a number of complaints that the Board of Health received, not the Department of Health received, about folks who maintained chickens that were inconveniencing and impinging on their neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Noise,
smell. How manure was handled,
right.
Attracting rats, smell. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of people who keep chickens do it. Neighbors don't care. They enjoy that they have chickens. But, there were people who were causing some problems. And the problem is, without regulation, there's no action that the Department of Health can take. All that can happen right now in the way it is, and I guess will remain, is if there's a problem and a neighbor complains, the Board of Health, the Department of Health can go and say, listen, there's an issue. And my understanding is most people will respond and try to remedy the issue. But for those people who will not do that, there's absolutely no further step that can be taken.
Yeah.
So what we were trying to do with the regulations, and we were trying to walk a fine line, we wanted to have regulations in place so when there was an instance of someone who was not responding to an issue that was associated with their property,
that you had something to fall
back on.
Yeah, got it.
But we were very sensitive to the fact we weren't trying to take people's chickens away. We weren't trying to take food out of people's mouths.
Are you going to get the chicken vote? That's the question.
I don't think so.
Yeah. but the topic of over-regulating, talk to me a little bit about that, because that's exactly the leaning in that he's doing.
Yeah. Actually, I think you'd be surprised. I'm not a big regulation guy. I think I see here in town there's a lot of red tape when you have to do something. I look at what has happened with all the permits that they had to get to repair the boardwalk. I mean, I actually don't like a lot of government regulation.
Yeah.
I think my opponent would be very surprised to hear me say that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't view the chicken regulation as a lot of regulation. What we were putting in place was analogous to what 8 other towns on the Cape have in terms of regulating chickens.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say he's overstating it. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. He viewed it as a real incursion on his And not just him. I think a lot of the people who were at that meeting who expressed concern about what we were trying to do really viewed it as an incursion on their rights to do things. And we really weren't trying to impinge on their rights. We were trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
That's really what we were trying to do.
Got it. The board's decisions are final.
Yes.
You don't need the selectmen to say yay or nay. That is a heady responsibility. Tell me give me an understanding of how you approach these finality decisions that you make. You could be sued if things don't work out. But you're a guy that lives here in Sandwich and you want to do good and give back. So talk to me a little bit about that headiness, if you will, of that role.
Yeah, I am really sensitive to that fact that the board, and it isn't just the Sandwich Board of Health, that's a state regulation. That's how boards of health function. Right. They're independent of the local government. I take that really seriously because of what you said. Any decision we make is final. And the way I try to approach that is, I kind of mentioned earlier, I try to be very thoughtful about issues. I try to research it as much as I can, get as much information as I can, understand both sides of an issue, and then hopefully make a good decision on that. But I think that's a very important point. Boards of health have an awful lot of responsibility. Mm-hmm. And, we do act autonomously from the rest of the town government. So really, I think it behooves all the members of the board, and I know the other board members feel the same way I do. That we take it very serious, and we try to be very careful and judicious in what we do, and do it take the job seriously, and understand the topics before we make a decision.
As a board member, current board member, where do you see our community right now at risk the most from a health perspective?
I think the community, and this is something that's been going on apparently for years. I moved to town in 2016. Is obviously the water quality issues. Mm-hmm. I think the town is really well positioned in terms of how they've set up the comprehensive water management plan, and the recent step they took to they're going to be contracting at Joint Base to use the water treatment plant there. And the whole plan they have for additional sewering, and then using the wastewater treatment plant at the Joint Base. So I think that's, I think that seems to be an ongoing issue. There's the whole issue of the contamination of the aquifer from the Joint Base that the EPA is in charge of cleaning up. The issue that there's still a lot of folks in town who have private wells and aren't part of the Sandwich Water District. Mm-hmm. The Sandwich Water District does a great job in monitoring the town wells and making sure the water is appropriate and clean. Obviously, people on town wells on private wells can do that, but it's expensive, and so I don't want to say they're at risk, but it isn't as solid as the Sandwich Water District. Mm-hmm. So overall, I think the whole water quality issue, and this whole new mandates from the state on Title V in terms of nitrogen and other pollutants affecting the watersheds that now the town has to respond to. Yeah. So that just seems to be an ongoing issue.
Is there a problem with nitrogen in the waters?
Oh yeah, I mean they did this new Title V mandate for dealing with the flow of nitrogen and pollutants into the watersheds, and it's mostly affects down south. Mm-hmm. They took that action after they did the appropriate testing and looked at the waters. I mean, we see that in Shawnee Pond. Yeah. I mean, that's what's causing the algae blooms in Shawnee Pond. Yeah. So there's, it comes from a lot of sources. It comes from the use of a lot of fertilizers and running off land that's nearby the watersheds. Right. It's also leaching coming out of, I guess, septic tanks. Yeah. So yeah, I think the nitrogen is a key issue, and I think that's why the state put that mandate in place.
Yeah. The Pilgrim Power Plant, mm-hmm. Dumping the radioactive water in the bay, it sounds terrifying, mm-hmm. but there is context, and there's a deeper picture than, oh my God, we have radioactive, our bay is going to be orange.
Right.
What's your feeling on the dumping?
Yeah, how can I say that? I want to get, again, I want to get the information. I want to know the species of radiation, my understanding that it's tritium, which is it's the hydrogen, 3 hydrogen atoms. Tritium's a beta emitter. It's fairly very low level radiation. Tritium's used in watches that glow and things like that. But I want to get the information. I want to understand what the species is. I want to know what the other pollutants are. I want to know what the volume is. And then you can do, this gets back to what we were saying earlier. I'd like to understand what they're proposing, what they're going to be dumping, what it is. And then, you know what it is. Now, as I understand it, again, from an article in the Enterprise, apparently this week, they were actually going to be testing the water that's going to be dumped into the bay. They were going to be, Holtec, the company that runs, they were going to be taking samples, and then I think it's the Department of Environmental Protection from the state was also going to be taking samples, and which is really good because you don't want just one person, certainly, but you don't want just the company taking the samples.
It's fine. Trust me.
Well, the issue apparently that came out was that while there are 2 groups taking samples, there's only going to be 1 laboratory doing the testing. Apparently, from the Department of Energy, they said they couldn't find another laboratory that could do this testing.
Interesting.
So that's, okay, 2 groups taking samples, but it's going to 1 place. One would like to see 2 samples, 2 separate labs, and then compare the results. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. And then again, hopefully, there'll be the information, and then we'll know exactly what it is, how long, again, like I said, the species, what's the concentration, what's the volume.
Does the Board of Health have a say in whether they can dump or not?
Yeah, I don't, as far as I know, we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, but I think that everyone who
It's never happened before.
It's never happened before. Everyone who lives on the bay is going to be concerned. So at least for Sandwich, the least we can do is get the information and inform the Sandwich residents, listen, this is what's going on. I don't know, once the information's out there and it turns out, this isn't something we want. This is, whatever it is, too much, whatever. I don't know, like, if the Board of Health could write a letter just saying, our opinion is, and whether that would have any weight, I don't know. In terms of regulation, I don't think we have any, regulatory control over this.
Got it.
But as a concerned community, if it really looks like there could be a negative effect, as a concerned community, I would at very least maybe be able to, express our concern. And perhaps coming from the Board of Health, maybe that would have a little bit more weight.
On the topic of communication, the Board of Health, Dave Mason, the Health Department, coming in and out of COVID and all of that whole pandemic, everything was about communication. I can't tell you how many times Dave Mason sat in this very studio and really worked his tail off to get communication out. Pandemic's a little bit behind us, a little bit of a hangover here and there, but it does bring into question how effective is the Board of Health, or in your opinion, the Health Department, in communicating out to residents of Sandwich.
Right.
What do you think?
I think Dave Mason did a heck of a job, and I think it's too bad that he's retired, but we all understand why he's retiring.
Yeah.
I think he did a terrific job on the different videos that he put together and trying to communicate to the residents. I think the Board of Health, maybe we can do a little bit more. We've talked about on the board, maybe we could, maybe not on a weekly basis on the Enterprise, but put together, when there's an issue, actually write something up that could be put in the if the Enterprise would agree to do that. Put it in the newspaper. So I think perhaps we could do a little better job of actually going out there and interfacing with the community. Like I said, I thought Dave did a terrific job. Now, I wasn't here during COVID. I came.
You came in right at the tail end.
Right at the tail end of it.
Yeah. Well, you lucked out, huh?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's something probably we could maybe do a little bit, or we could try to look at other ways we could communicate with the community.
The Joint Base contamination controls. Talk to me a little bit about what you are viewing with that, and where do we need to be putting our attention going forward?
With the Joint Base? Well,
With
I think
the
the
Joint
EPA, I mean, the EPA is, as I understand, is responsible for monitoring that cleanup, and obviously that has to continue.
Are you concerned about it?
It's funny, when we moved here to Sandwich in 2016, we were looking for houses, and we did look at houses down south, and we were very surprised to learn that some of the houses with private, there was a whole issue with the plumes of contamination, and that kind of freaked us out a little bit, you know?
Sure, yeah, of course.
So to that extent, certainly I'm concerned about it, but the fact that they are taking action, one hopes they're doing a good job in cleaning up the aquifer, and as far as I understand it, certainly stopping the sources of contamination on the Joint Base that caused the problem originally.
Yeah.
I know that's something the EPA is looking at now. There's this new proposed machine gun range on the Joint Base.
Right.
And one of the issues is, well, wait a minute, is this going to be another source of pollution that's going to get into the aquifer?
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's the sort of questions that have to be asked.
Yeah. When we look at the issues that are driving people to vote, I've been doing this for many years, and I've talked to many candidates, and I always say, you know, what do you feel is the issue that will motivate someone to go to the polls and say, I got to vote for somebody on the Board of Health or the Select Board or whatever it may be? What, and this may speak to communication, people may not know exactly what the Board of Health does, but what would you say to people to say, it's really important to pay attention to what the Board of Health does and to get the right person in that seat?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, the Board of Health impacts so many areas of your life. I mean, you know, from the water quality to food, overall health of the community, dealing with things like a COVID pandemic. I mean, I think it has an important function. I mean, and that has a large impact with people. So I think for any if anyone voting to someone, I think the thing that drives them to the polls is when they recognize, you know, this really affects me. Yeah. Or either there's a single specific issue, hate to say it, the chicken regulations, you know, is going to innervate a lot of people. Yeah. You know, they weren't happy about it, so that they're going to go to the polls, and that's understandable. But any issue like that, you know, where people say, geez, that really is going to impact me, I need to understand, you know, who's dealing with it, who's responsible for it, and how can I have a say in how those decisions are going to be made.
Excuse me.
Certainly.
You're making me choke up.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
I didn't realize I was that emotional.
Yeah, I know. It does happen to me now and then. You are... why vote for you versus your challenger? Excuse me. And I'm not getting emotional about that. Really, I'm not. But why, you know, why, I'm going to stand there in the polls. Yeah. And I'm going to see two names. Yep. Why you?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One, I've been serving on the board for 1.5 years. So I do have some experience. And in that 1.5 years, like I said, I've tried to educate myself so I think I've tried to establish a foundation of knowledge that supports me working on the Board of Health. I think another reason is what we were talking about. I really am sensitive to the unique nature of the Board of Health in terms of, you know, that our decisions are final. And I think whether it's me or anyone else, what you want to have on the Board of Health are people who are thoughtful, who don't shoot from the hip, you know, who think about issues, who are willing to look at both sides of an issue, get all the information, do a careful study, and then make a careful, determined decision. I mean, you don't want, you need someone who's going to be thoughtful. Yeah. And like I said, not people who just shoot from the hip, not people who, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. And then the other thing is, while I don't think it's absolutely necessary, I think having some experience in some aspect of what the Board of Health does.
Yeah.
All my training is in the health and medical area.
Yeah.
My whole career was different aspects
Very
of health and biology.
extensive career. NASA?
Yeah, I worked for NASA for about 25 years.
What was your job there? Director of Medical Policy and Ethics.
Right. Yeah. So that was sort of the second half of my career at NASA.
Very quickly, we're running out of time, but what is that job?
So, Director of Medical Policy and Ethics, I was responsible for overseeing the development and implementation of policies, standards, and requirements for anything related to health and medical issues for NASA. That included the medical care of astronauts on the ground and in space. It was the health of the occupational health of NASA's workforce, and it also was the actual standards and requirements that go into the development and building of human spaceflight hardware, launch systems, habitats, and things like that. Anything the engineers had to do that would affect a human being,
you had to be involved in.
We had to be involved in. Yeah. So
I was hoping you were going to say something like I led tours around NASA because I am impressed by that. I'm always impressed with things with large acronyms as names.
Well, NASA has a lot of acronyms.
A ton of
It's an
acronyms.
Engineering organization. Everything's an acronym.
Well, the acronym you're chasing is BOH.
Right.
David, thank you so much for coming
My
in.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to meet you. All right, my friends, it is going to be time to vote. I sound like I'm on American Idol or something, but it is your time to have your voice heard May 4th. And you can, of course, depending on the time frame of when you see this, you can mail in your vote. But have your voice heard. This is about the Board of Health. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Greg Anderson. I'll see you soon.